The Sanhedrin, our Supreme Council, convened. They were trying to bring testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death. But they had nothing. False witnesses were even questioned, and some were saying, "We heard this man say that he would destroy the temple made by man, and in 3 days raise another temple not made by man." But their testimony was not consistent. Finally, Caiaphas himself approached the Lord, and he said, "Do you make no answer? What about these charges brought against you?" Jesus said nothing, but Caiaphas continued, "If you are the Christ, tell us. If I tell you, you will not believe me. If I ask you a question, you will not answer. But hereafter, the Son of Man sits at the right hand of the power of God and comes in the clouds of heaven. Are you then the Son of God?" "I am." Oh, Caiaphas was outraged. He tore his garments and cried out, "Blasphemy! You've heard it with your own ears. What further need do we have of judgment? What is your verdict against this man?" And with one voice they answered, "He deserves death." Now, when this verdict came to the attention of Judas Iscariot, he was overwhelmed with guilt and remorse for what he had done. And so he took the 30 silver coins, the price of betrayal, and returned to the chief priests in the temple area. And he said, I have betrayed innocent blood." But they answered, "What is that to us? See to this yourself." Not knowing what else to do, Judas threw the coins into the temple sanctuary, and he ran out into the night and hung himself. Judas, why did you not return to find the mercy of God? We all denied him. But the Lord shows mercy to those who repent. When the priests heard about the fate of Judas, they counseled together. We cannot put this into the temple treasury, for it is blood money." And so they decided instead to use it, to purchase the potter's field, giving it the name Akel Dama, which means field of blood. This fulfilled the prophecy of Jeremiah and also the prophecy of Zechariah, who said, "They took the 30 silver coins, the price of betrayal, and with it they purchased the potter's field." And so it has been since then. This has been their decision. Now, after this, they took Jesus to the Praetorium. The Praetorium. It is the palace of the governor Pontius Pilate. But the Jews did not enter into the Praetorium because doing so is against our laws. And so they waited outside. Soon, Pilate came out to them, and he said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And they answered, "He leads the people astray. He forbids us to pay taxes to Caesar, and he says that he is Christ, a king. If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." evildoer. Well, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. No, we are not permitted to put anyone to death. You see, only Roman law can allow the death penalty. And so Pilate entered into the praetorium and he summoned Jesus. You? Are you the king of the Jews? Are you saying this on your own, or did others tell you about me? I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you up to me. What have you done? My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting, that I might not be delivered up to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. So, you are a king. You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born. For this I have come into the world, to bear witness of the truth. Everyone who hears my voice hears the truth. Truth. What is truth? And after saying this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no guilt in him. But they answered, he leads the people astray throughout Judea, all the way from Galilee to Jerusalem. From Galilee? You say this man is from Galilee. That is Herod's jurisdiction, and he is in the city even now. Yes, I will send this Jesus to Herod and be done with the matter. And he did. Now Herod was very eager to see Jesus, for he had heard much about him and was hoping to see a sign performed that he might be entertained. And so when they brought the Lord in, Herod questioned him at length. Jesus said, nothing, did nothing. The scribes, chief priests, Pharisees became angry. Herod was angry too. And with his men, they treated Jesus with contempt, dressing him in a royal robe, mocking him as a king. And then Herod returned Jesus to Pilate. Now, these two men had been at odds with one another because of a previous matter, but because of this, they became friends that day. How strange. So when they brought Jesus to Pilate the second time, he went out to them and said, so this is the man you say leads the people to rebellion. Well, I have examined him carefully, and I find him not guilty of any charges brought against him. Nor does Herod, for he has returned him to me. But in order to satisfy you, I will punish him and then release him. For there is a law that at the Sabbath times like this, one prisoner might be released. And there was a prisoner named Barabbas, who had been arrested for murder and for insurrection during a political uprising. And the people were asking Pilate to make good on this custom. And so he said to them, do you want me then to release for you the King of the Jews? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered Jesus up. And besides, while he was on the judgment seat, Pilate had received a message from his wife saying, have nothing to do with that righteous man. For this night I have suffered greatly in a dream because of him. But the crowds, they were asking Pilate to release Barabbas. And so he said to them, "Whom shall I release?" And they answered, "Barabbas." "Then what shall I do with the one who's called Christ?" "Crucify him." "What? Crucify? Why? What evil has he done? No, I will punish him and then crucify him." But they cried out louder and louder, "Crucify him! Crucify!" When Pilate saw that he was losing control, that a mob was forming and that a riot was about to break out, he called for a basin of water. And after dipping his hands in the water, he said, "I am innocent of his blood. See to this yourselves." And they answered, "His blood be upon our heads and upon our children." And so Pilate released Barabbas and delivered Jesus up according to their will. They took him away to the place of scourging. It is a large open area with a wooden post fixed upright in the center. They faced Jesus to the wood and then secured his wrists to the top of the post, stripping him bare. 2 soldiers took their positions behind Jesus, each with a scourge in hand, whips of leather cord with iron and bone attached to tear the flesh of the victim. They drew back and with great force whipped him over and over and over again until the body of Jesus was torn and bleeding. Finally, they stopped, and Jesus hung limp by his wrists. And so they cut him down. He collapsed to the ground, but they lifted him up and dragged him into the praetorium. And there the Roman battalion gathered around. They were taunting Jesus, dressing him in another royal robe, mocking him again as a king. Soldiers took thorns, and after weaving them into a crown, they set it upon his head, pressing it down until blood streamed down his face and beard. A reed was pressed into his hand as though it were the ruling scepter of a king. And they knelt before Jesus in mock humility, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were spitting upon him and beating him. Finally, Pilate went out to the Jews and he said, "Look, I am bringing him out to you, so you may know I find no guilt in him." And so they brought Jesus out, wearing the royal robe and the crown of thorns. And Pilate declared, "Behold, the man." But our Jewish authorities cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him! Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him." But they answered, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he, being a man, made himself out to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he became even more afraid. And he entered again into the praetorium, and he summoned Jesus. where are you from?" Jesus said nothing. "You do not speak to me? Do you not know I have authority to release you? And I have authority to crucify you?" "No, you have no authority over me, except what has been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me up to you, he has the greater sin." Pilate made another attempt to release Jesus. He went out and took his seat at the bema, the place of judgment, a place called the pavement, Gabbatha. It was early in the morning, preparation day for Passover. And Pilate said to those who had gathered, the Jews, "Our authority. Behold, your king." But they answered, "Away with him, away with him, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king?" And then they answered, "We have no king but Caesar." No king but Caesar? We Jews hate our Roman occupation. To say that we have no king but Caesar is unthinkable. It can only mean that the hatred for Jesus is far worse than hatred for Caesar himself. And so Pilate was faced with a choice. Either release a man he knew to be innocent and risk his position, or condemn an innocent man to protect his position. Pilate made his choice. Soldiers were dispatched. They came to Jesus and tore the royal robe from his wounded body, opening the wounds that had dried to the robe. And then they returned his clothing. A heavy beam of wood was set upon his shoulders, and he was pushed into the street to carry it to the place of execution. But the weight was too much. One of the soldiers took a man from the crowd that was gathering. I remember his name. Simon, like mine, from Cyrene. Just a man coming in from the country. And they put the wood upon the back of Simon and pushed Jesus on, with Simon trailing. 2 criminals trailed behind, men also condemned to die that day. Many people gathered to watch this pathetic parade, and they were ridiculing. But some were weeping, especially the women. At one point, Jesus stopped, and looking at the women, he said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and your children. For behold, the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren ones, the wombs which never bore, the breasts which never nursed. And they will say to the mountains, Fall upon us, and to the hills, Cover us, thus fulfilling the prophecy of Hosea. So terrible will be those days. For if they do this when the tree is green with life, what will they do when it is dead? Move!" A Roman soldier pushed Jesus on down the way of sorrows and out the city gate to the place of execution, called Golgotha. It means place of a skull. And there they gave Jesus wine mixed with gall. How strange that those causing the pain would give a drug to ease the pain. But Jesus knew what it was, and he would not take it. No, he would not escape the pain, but he would feel the fullness of our punishment, that we might know the fullness of his mercy. And so they stripped him and pushed his back against a beam of wood now lying in the dirt. A Roman soldier took Jesus by the hand, stretching the Lord's arm and kneeling on the inside of his elbow to hold it firm against the wood. And then he took a nail, an iron spike, the length of my hand, and he set it at the wrist of Jesus. And then that soldier took a heavy mallet and raised it high overhead. And he came crashing down over and over again, driving the nail through Jesus into the wood. And the Lord writhed in pain. But he uttered no curse. Quickly, the soldier moved to the other hand. Again, the hammer did its work. And Jesus cried out, "Ah! Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Forgive them? There was no malice. There were no threats, but only a plea to forgive those who were murdering him. What kind of a man is this? I remember the words of Jesus. I remember, "You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemies. I say to you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you." He was living out those words, even unto death. And so they hoisted the heavy beam up with Jesus hanging by the nails, and they fixed it to the post already set in the ground. Soldiers took the feet of Jesus and brought them together, bending his knees and pressing his ankles against the post. They took another iron spike and drove it through both feet into the wood. Oh, the pain. Can you imagine? No. You cannot imagine, nor can I. After this, soldiers stripped Jesus and they took his garments, dividing them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier, and also his tunic, his undergarment, which was seamless, woven in one piece. They said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, to decide whose it shall be." Not knowing it, they were fulfilling the psalm. And so there he hung. And Pilate then wrote an inscription and put it above his head on the cross. It said, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." It was written in Hebrew, Latin, Greek, for all to see. Some of our Jewish authorities went to Pilate and said, "Do not write King of the Jews." No, that's what he said. "I am King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." And so the inscription remained. And so there Jesus hung, stripped of everything, even his dignity as a man. But the mockery did not end there. No, people passed by shaking their heads saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and in 3 days raise it up, well then come down from the cross and we will believe in you." He saved others, he cannot save himself. Our Jewish leaders were also getting into it. He did, he saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Well, let him come down from the cross and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Well, let God deliver him now if he cares for him. For he said, "I am the Son of God." Even the Roman soldiers, who have no interest in Jewish religion, were getting into it. "If you are the King of the Jews, come down from the cross." And the two criminals now crucified to the right and the left were mocking him. The only ones who were there to mourn were his mother, Mary. Mary, the wife of Clopas, Mary Magdalene, and John. I was not there. I was too afraid and too ashamed. When Jesus saw his mother standing there and John nearby, he said, "Woman, look, your son." "John, look, your mother." Even from the cross, he ministered. Jesus knew that he could no longer care for his mother as before, and so he entrusted that responsibility to John. And from that hour, John took her into his own home and cared for her as for his own mother. Now, one of the criminals crucified there became thoughtful, silent, as he watched the Lord serve in his suffering. But the other one continued to mock. "Are you not the Christ? Then save yourself and us." But the other answered, "Do you not fear God? For we are under the same judgment, and it is right, for we are guilty. But this man has done nothing wrong." "Jesus, when you enter your kingdom, please remember me." And then Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth. Today, you will be with me in paradise." Now, from the 6th hour of the day until the 9th hour, the 6th hour when the sun is highest in the sky, darkness came on upon the land. It was an eerie darkness, as though the light of this world were being extinguished. And then, at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." Those who were standing by and heard him said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." No, this was no call to Elijah. This was a cry to the Father. my God, my God, why have you forsaken me? As the Son of God took our sin upon himself, the Father had to turn away. And Jesus felt the loneliness of separation to the depth of his soul. After this, because he was so dehydrated, and to fulfill the scripture, Jesus said, I thirst. And so they put a sponge full of sour wine upon a branch of hyssop and brought it up to his mouth. And they said, here, let's see whether Elijah will help him now. And so after he tasted it, Jesus said, finished. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Jesus died.